session. All right, hi everyone. I welcome you all into this session number 3 on APIs. So in last couple of sessions, we talked primarily about SOA, right? And I mentioned SOA is about two things: services and messages, right? Then this works on a client server architecture. I hope you guys recollect that. Then in services, what does service mean technically?
Business functionality.
Business functionality.
It's a business functionality, and these are implemented with the help of concept of web services,
Web service.
right? So now this web services means some business functionality over a network, okay? And if you want to develop a web service, you can develop in any language, but then from the consumer standpoint, that language doesn't matter. What a service consumer would need to consume a service?
Specifications.
Very nice. The consumer would need the specifications. And how many types of web services can we have?
So
Two types.
and rest.
SOAP and REST, right? Very nice. So these specifications. So we started talking about SOAP first, right? SOAP stands for
Simple object access.
Simple object access protocol.
very nice. It stands for Simple Object Access Protocol. It is a XML based protocol, right? So it is a XML based messaging protocol, which has some structure defined, and you have to follow that. So any SOAP message, right, will be enclosed in some specific element, right? Can you recall what is the root element of any SOAP message?
Definitions.
No. Definitions is not the right answer. Envelope is the right answer. Okay. There is a SOAP envelope, and every SOAP message which goes to the end service will be part of SOAP envelope. Right, within SOAP envelope, what else do we have? We may have a header, and then we may have a body, right? And then within the body, we will have the actual payload. What is the payload?
Request message.
Very nice. Request message is called as payload. All right. So now for this SOAP-based services, what is the convention or what is the methodology to define the specification?
WSDL file.
Very nice. We do it with the help of a WSDL file. Okay, there can be WSDL file or WSDL URL. What does WSDL stand for?
Web service description language.
Very nice. Web service description language. So can we express the definition of only SOAP-based service with the help of, can we express only the specifications of SOAP-based service using WSDL file, or even the HTTP-based services as well?
Both.
Both can be used. It can be used for expressing the specifications of any of these web services, but then as a part of the industry standard, you would see in majority of the cases, it is being used for SOAP, right? What are the other mechanisms we have to write the specifications for REST-based services?
Swagger.
We have Swagger. We have Open API specifications. We have got RAML. We have got WADL, etc. Right? So there are multiple standards to define the specifications of REST-based services. Very nice. So now there is a section or there is a specific entity which helps in defining the structure of the XML, right? So there are certain rules which are written to define the structure of the XML, and a service consumer always needs to adhere to those rules or set of rules, right? So where do we define those rules? Which is that file called as? Okay, schema. Very nice. Schema is used to define the structure of request and response. Very nice. And for XML, it is called as XML schema, right? There is a file XML schema definition. Yes. So what is the root element in XML schema definition file?
Schema.
Very nice.
Schema
Schema itself is the root element. So Whether you are writing or anybody else is writing it, it is a standard. The root element will be always schema. This schema is typically imported in one more file, which is actually exposed to the service consumer.
XSD.
So this itself is a XSD. This XSD is imported in WSDL file. Yes or no? This XSD is imported in the WSDL file. It is not necessary that we separately write XSD. We may or may not write it. If we write it separately, it is called as external XSD. And if we do not write it, it is more like an inline schema, right? Okay. Now in the WSDL, there are a lot of different elements. Which is the root element in the WSDL file?
Definition.
Very nice. Okay, definitions is the root element. Good that people recollect it. Okay, I'm sorry guys if you're finding it little boring, but I just want to make sure that we all quickly recall what all we discussed. It is very, very important. Now within these definitions, we have multiple sub elements, right? Or you can say child elements. Which element holds different types of operations?
Schema.
Port type.
Types.
Very nice. Port type.
Good.
Port type represents the collection of operations, right?
Operation.
How many different types of operations we can have?
3 types.
N number of operation.
No, 3 types of operation you
We
can
can
have.
have 3 types. Total number can be
Synchronous,
n,
yeah.
but the types are 3: synchronous,
Asynchronous,
asynchronous,
one way.
Mixed.
One way.
one way.
One by one.
Okay. So if a WSDL file is given to you, right, and you have to identify whether this file has any asynchronous operation or not, how can you find it out?
By checking the number of port types.
Yeah, port types. It has
Okay.
2 port types and both input and output.
Both input and output is there means it is synchronous.
So whenever we want to look for asynchronous operation, it will minimum have 2 port types, one for request and another for
Response.
callback. Yes, though this is, some people call it as a response, but you remember I have mentioned that it is
Callback.
preferred to call it as a callback.
Callback.
Very nice. Now there is a element which is responsible for defining the protocol that a consumer needs to adhere to. Which is that element where we define the protocol?
Binding.
Very nice. Binding element, right? So there is a binding element where we define the protocol associated with the different operations. Can we have 2 bindings for a same service?
Yes.
We can have
Yes.
2 bindings, right? If you remember the last visual we saw, right? It had 2 bindings, right? Both SOAP and HTTP based. Very nice. So if let's say the location is given to you, right, of a web service, some location is given, like let's say HTTP : www.calculator.com, something like this. Okay, and now if you have to find maybe something like this. Okay, now if you have to find the visual URL for this, how can you find it out?
Append with question mark
Append
and
with
WSDL.
question mark WSDL.
Append this with question mark visual and you launch it. If the service itself is accessible from your network, ideally the visual also should be accessible by appending the question mark visual. Very nice. So I think we talked about these things, but then one very, very crucial part, right, which is pending, is about namespaces. A lot of people working in the industry have a lot of confusion about the namespaces. Even yesterday, I was talking with some of the freshers. So for example, you might have seen when we saw the definitions element, it was written something like this. Okay. It was written something like this. So a lot of people tell me the name of the element is WSDL : definitions, which is not true. The name of the element is definitions, and WSDL : whatever it is written, right? This is WSDL : here is either called as prefix or alias of the namespace. Now, what is this namespace? Why do we need a namespace? This is very, very important. And by the end of today's session, we'll make sure that each and every line, right, return in the WSDL and the XSD file should be very clear to us. And if we need to tweak it around, we should be able to do it. Okay. All right. So now what happens is XML gives us one flexibility, right? And that flexibility is that we can choose the name of elements as per our convenience, right? XML allows users to decide the name of the elements. Is it true? If you were working on HTML, right, which is also kind of a tag-based language, there you have some standard tags, isn't it?
Yes.
So there, for example, if you want to write some, if you want something to be in header, you have to use corresponding tag. If you want something in body, you have to use corresponding tag. If you have to use a line break, there is a separate standard element for that. If you want to define something in a paragraph, there is a standard element or a standard tag.
Paragraph element.
Yes, very nice. So now in XML, you have the flexibility to choose the name of the element. Okay, there is no such hard and fast rule that you have to remember the name of the elements. But then with this flexibility comes an additional responsibility or a scenario wherein you will have to face some scenarios where there can be ambiguity or a conflict between two users using the same name of the element but for different contexts. For example, I'll give you a layman example. Okay, so do you have the flexibility to choose your Aadhaar card number?
No.
No. But do you have the flexibility to choose the name of your child?
Yes.
Yes. Now, when your okay, very good. So you have the flexibility to use to select the name of your child, which is absolutely correct. Similarly, XML gives the flexibility to choose the name of the elements. But is it a possibility that two different parents, right, can end up choosing the same name for their children or for their childs? For example, my daughter name is, let's say, Alice. Okay, is it possibility that other parent can also choose the name as Alice?
Yes.
They can do that, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
It's so in your companies also, let's say anybody working in big MNCs or even a medium-sized MNC. Let's say we go to Infosys and we ask, there is a, let's say, some program going on where all the employers of the complete organizations are present, and they will ask, the CEO of the company will say, hey, Mr. Venkatesh, please come on the dais. Or maybe the CEO of the company says, Mr. Venkatesh Reddy, please come on the dais. How many people do you expect might come on the dais? Minimum 100 people will come if you're in Andhra Pradesh. It is such common name, right? So now what is the right way? How will you make sure that only one individual element whom we are referring to only come on the dais and not all the Venkatesh or all the Venkatesh Reddys come on the dais?
By using surnames.
By using surname, but
Our project name,
okay,
our account name.
account name. Okay, anything else you can think of? Where you see there is no chance of confusion at all.
Employee ID.
Designation.
Okay, so there can be many things, like very creative answers are coming from our trainees. Somebody told designation, somebody told account name, somebody told surname. Okay, maybe
Employee ID.
employee ID. But okay, now what do you think out of all these options, which is one way that is always ensure that it will never be repetitive or duplicate for two different employees having the same name?
Employee.
Yes, so I can choose any of these things, but there is always a possibility that there are four people with the same name, same designation. It is also a possibility that may have two people with the same name in the same account. Some people might have faced this kind of situation also. And about surname, let's forget it, because there are a lot of people who will have the same surnames also, right? But then employee ID is something which is always unique, right? Which is always unique. So now what happens in the XML world? So employee ID, do we wait for a situation wherein we will have two employees with the same name and then we will allocate them an employee ID, or it is a standard process which is followed across the organizations to make sure that instead of, because organizations do not know who is Sumit, who is Amit, only from their perspective, it is a number which matters, right? That is their employee ID. So as a standard, the day you are joining the company, you are given some employee IDs. Yes. And anything which happens beyond that, whether it is your salary transaction, whether it is your appraisal, whether it is your relieving from the company, everything is associated with that ID, right? So the point I'm trying to make is, whenever there are chances of some kind of ambiguity, whenever there are some chances of ambiguity, we try to allocate some ID so that we can identify or we can refer that individual entity in a unified manner, in a unique manner, right? So similarly, let's say Sumit is writing one file where he's writing name, or maybe he's writing, let's say, employee data, and in employee data he's writing first name Sumit. This is how we write the XML file, right? XML file must have which element?
Root element.
Root
Root
element.
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 Yes, very nice. So this is how Sumit is writing. So what kind of details Sumit, let's say this is the file of Sumit employee.xml. So what kind of details is this file holding? Only the name related details, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes. Now there is another guy, Prithvi. He is writing, let's say, emp salary.xml. Employee here, let's say we have salary. Okay, just one thing I'll add here is, typically when we'll have some employee related information, we'll also have some kind of employee ID also. Okay, I'll just add that. That doesn't matter over here much, but then let's add that. Okay, I wish my salary is like this, so that's why whenever I take sessions, I write a bigger number. Okay, that's
Me
fine.
too, Sumit.
I mean, if we get it or not, that's a different thing, but at least we can wish. All right. So now these are the, okay. So these are the two different representation, or there are two different files where we are trying to hold the employee related info, right? And this info is related about an employee with ID 101. Okay, one file is holding the name related info, right? And other file is holding what kind of information? The salary related information. Now it might happen that these, and it is not like it might happen in real world, this will happen for sure, that now you are writing one more file, let's say employees.xml, okay, or maybe employees consolidate.xml, something of that sort. And now in this file, you want to refer the elements from Sumit's file also, as well as Prithvi's file also. Okay, you want to refer elements from Sumit file also, Prithvi file also. Now let's say first thing what you will do is you will import both the files. Yes or no? Because if you want to refer something from some file, that file must be accessible, right? So now once that is done, you will import both the files, right? Once that is done, now for example, I start referring employee dot salary. Do we have employee dot salary? Ideally, in this file we have employee dot salary, but do we have employee dot salary in this file?
No.
No, right? Now, first of all, when this file is being written, right, employees.xml, it gets an ambiguity. What kind of ambiguity it gets? It does not understand that which employee you're talking about. You're talking about the employee which is coming, which is defined in Sumit's file, or you're talking about the employee which is defined in Prithvi's file, because we have got two elements with the same name, but different, their context is different. One element, one employee element is talking about the name of the employee. Second employee element is talking about the salary of the employee, right? So sometimes what happens, we try to define an object. Employee is like an object, right? But their context might be different completely, isn't it? So we may have completely different context. So in that case, the biggest problem is when we have such kind of scenarios where we have two elements with the same name but a different context, and then we try to refer these elements in a third file, right? This will always happen, right? We always want to reuse things in any conventional language. In any language you talk about, we'll always try to reuse stuff. We would not want to define things again and again from scratch. And even when we follow the modular approach, right, we might need to follow modular approach. Let's say there are 10 people in the team, we can, all of us cannot continue working in the same file, right? So to manage things more effectively, to work in parallel, we might break down our whole problem statement among different people. Different people might work on different files, and eventually we might develop a file which where we have import statements to pull the data from these different files. And since XML is giving us the flexibility to choose the name of the elements, I cannot tell to Prithvi that your name of the element is wrong, and I cannot even tell to Sumit that your name is wrong. Usually, at least ideally, I cannot do that. Again, if you manually want to control that, you can always do that. But then this is a problem statement, right? This is a problem statement. Now, whenever we have two elements with the same name but a different context, it leads to an ambiguity for the XML parser. Now, in order to avoid this ambiguity, we leverage the concept of namespaces. Okay, here a quick note: whenever we have two elements with the same name but different context, whenever we have two elements with the same name but different context, it creates an ambiguity for the XML parser. In order to avoid this ambiguity, we leverage the concept of namespaces. Okay. Now, this kind of problem statement is not only there in XML. Okay. There are other conventional languages also where you might have seen this kind of problem. I'm not sure how many of you are aware about Java, but then in Java, the different classes reside in certain entity. What is that entity called as? So whenever you want to refer classes in Java, you do not refer directly the class, but then these different classes are tied to an entity. What is that entity called as? Package? Yes or no? There are packages, there are sub packages, and those packages or sub packages will hold your classes or interfaces. Is that correct? You might have heard of java.lang package, java.util package, java.sql package. Like that, there are many, right? Java.io package. Yes, I'm not Java expert. I'll not write much. Then otherwise, I'll end up not having the name remembered. But that's fine. So now what happens is there is a package. There is a class. There is a class called as a date class. Okay, there is a class called as a date class. Now that date class is there in the java.sql package also. Okay, the date class is there in the java.sql package also. There is a date class which is there in the java.util package also. So we have java.util.date. We have got java.sql.date, right? Now these have different implementations altogether. Okay, these have different implementations altogether. This date class may have its own member variables, functions, or sorry, what we call it as methods. This date class may have its own functions and methods, right? But then since these are placed on two different packages, can we write a class where I can use this date class as well as this date class?
No.
We can write, let's say I write a class A where I want to make the function, the method from these both classes. I can always do that. But the only thing which I will need to make sure is whenever I refer anything from these two classes, I have to use fully qualified name. I have to use fully qualified name. Fully qualified name means you have to exactly tell which particular date class you're talking about, wherein you have to mention the package name dot class name, right? Fully qualified name is nothing but package name dot subpackage name dot class name. You have to give the exact name. Only giving the name of the class might create an ambiguity. So we go with the fully qualified name concept. So, and this is not only there over here, okay? Those people who come from SQL PS SQL background, right? If we want to create two procedures, right, with the same name, then what you have to do? You have to place those two procedures in two different packages, right? This concept of packages there in the SQL PL SQL also, right? So whenever we develop some procedure, we place it in some package. And if we ever have a scenario where we want to have two procedures with the same name, but different implementations, so what we typically would like to do is we would like to place them in two different packages so that I can uniquely refer to each of these procedures having the same name, but different implementations. So same concept is here over in XML, wherein we have the flexibility to choose the name of the elements, which remains with us as is. Okay, but then in order to make sure that that flexibility does not create a problem for us, we use a standard that whatever element we define, that element we always try to associate with some namespace such that whenever this element is referred in the future, we can avoid the ambiguity. So we cannot say that always 100% will be able to avoid the ambiguity, but then we should follow such naming convention for your namespaces such that you do not have any chance of ambiguity. Okay. Now you tell me, are we defining the name of the elements over here, or where exactly is the name of the element defined? As a who defines the name of the element? Service consumer or service provider?
Service provider.
Service provider. Very nice. And where the service provider defines the name of the elements which must be sent for request or which will be sent for response? Where does it? Where is it taken care?
Material definition.
Schema file, right?
Yes.
Yes. So now the point I'm trying to say is here, whatever XML we are writing, typically who will write this kind of XML? This kind of XML will be written by service consumer, right? But the elements are defined in the schema files. So whenever an element is defined, that owner of the or author of that element should always try to make sure that they associate some namespace with that element so that whenever any other person defines the name with the same element, it can be referred without any ambiguity. So what I'm trying to say is, actually I explained you with this kind of example because it is easy to understand the schema. But to be very honest, this is not the place where we define the elements. Here we try to write a XML which is typically in compliance to the schema file, right? Service consumer, that is the job of the service consumer, right? To write a XML which is in line or which is in compliance to the schema definition, right? But it is a schema definition. That is the actual place where the elements are defined. And whenever elements are defined, you always need to make sure as an author or a owner of those elements that you always associate those elements with some kind of a namespace such that those elements can be individually, uniquely access and do not get into a situation where there is an ambiguity, even if somebody else also has created an element with the same name, right? So one important responsibility comes in when for the service provider is that whenever he or she is defining the name of the elements, the namespace must be chosen wisely, right? But if it is not chosen wisely, there are always chances that we might end up again creating ambiguity. Any questions so far? If you're not following, please let me know. I'll explain all these things with the example first of all, but anyone who does not understand why do we need a namespace?
Will you explain one more time, Sumit?
All right. So I'm saying that whenever we have a file or whenever we have a situation where we have two elements, two XML elements with the same name, but different conventions, right? But different conventions, then it might lead to an ambiguity for XML parser. For example, let's say this is Sumit's file, this is Prithvi's file, and let's say this tomorrow gets consolidated into a single file, something like this. Now, when XML parser will try to parse this kind of file, it will not understand that whether you are talking about employee which is defined by Prithvi or the employee which is defined by Sumit, because these two have different context. One is talking about the name and other is talking about the salary. So in order to avoid this kind of ambiguity, we cannot restrict Sumit and Prithvi to have the same name, but then we can request them to follow the standards. And the standard says that whenever you define any element, please associate that element with some kind of a namespace so that your element is always uniquely referred and you do not end up creating an ambiguity for the XML parser. It's pretty simple, not so tough. There, as I gave you an example also, there is a room where we have two people with the name Srinivas. If I say, hey Srinivas, please come here, maybe both might come. So it's an ambiguity. So in order to avoid that ambiguity, we might call Srinivas having an Aadhaar card number this, please come here. Srinivas having a PAN card number this, please come here. So this namespace is kind of a methodology to avoid that kind of ambiguity in the XML space. Any questions, guys? All right. So what we'll do is we'll start with certain examples. Okay. I just don't want to leave it to some theoretical knowledge. You should understand it practically, right? We'll start with certain examples. Okay. So now let's say we are defining one visual file. Okay. So visual file will typically start with a definitions element. Definitions element, and within definitions element, we will have one types section. What is this type section used for?
Defining the data types.
Very nice. Defining the data types, and where exactly we define the data types? Under the schema section. Yes or no? So now when we define under the schema section, there can be two things. One is we write the complete code over here, right? And that methodology is called as inline schema. Very nice. Then there might be another way wherein you might see something like this: import namespace is equal to this kind of attribute, and then there will be schema location equal to something like this, and maybe it is importing some schema file. Let's say calculator.xsd, right? If we have this thing, there is some namespace which I'll talk about, right? But you would typically see this kind of, line return whenever we have an external schema. So that means there is a separate file called as calculator.xsd. So what we'll do is calculator.xsd. Here we will start defining it. Okay. Now this calculator.xsd, which is the root element.
No.
Very nice, schema. Now we are saying that anyone who will define a XSD file will have to start the name of the first element as schema element, but somebody must have defined it, right? Somebody must have defined it. Okay, let me ask you this. If I am writing this calculator.xsd, who is the owner of this file?
You.
You. Okay, very nice. Sumit is the owner. But am I the owner of schema element? So there is a standard element with the name schema element. I have not defined it.
W3C.
Very nice. W3C community has defined it. Okay, so there is a standard community who is defining these standard elements, which gives them some specific traits, right? These element is just a name, but that definition which has been given by the community who has defined this element has given it some traits, right? Some kind of features. Now what I want to do as a user is I just want to inherit all those features by using this standard name, but I did not define it. I have the tendency to extend those features and give it at certain elements which are mine, but then the schema is a standard element. Okay. But overall, this file is mine. So the point I'm trying to make is, so for example, you make curry at your home, right? You might be the owner of curry, or you might owner maybe not the right word, but you are the chef, or maybe you are the person who has prepared it. But there are a lot of ingredients which you might have not prepared, right? If you use some kind of spices over there, have you prepared those spices? Some people might have done it, but in majority of the cases, no, right?
No.
We use certain ready-made spices. Let's say you are using some cream. Have you prepared that cream? May not be the case, right? So there are a lot of things, right? Even that raw vegetable which has been used to prepare the curry, did you grow that? No, right? So what I'm trying to say is that whenever we develop these kind of files, we end up using lot of standard elements. And whenever we are using any element, so there are two things. Whenever we are talking about the external elements, you might be doing one of two things, and those two things are either you are defining the element. Okay, either you are defining the element, or what is the next thing you might think of? Either you are defining the element or you are referring the element. These are the two possible actions you would be doing with these different XML elements. Either you will define the elements or you would refer it. That's all. Right? So now when you are using the schema element, are you defining this element or you're referring this element?
Referring the
We are
element.
referring, we are not defining it. When you are defining the element, you need to define the namespace also. Yes or no? If you are the parent of something, if you are the owner of something, then only you will have to define the name, right?
Yes.
Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes. If you are the parent of your child, then only you will have the authority, right, to define the name of your child. Can you define the name of your neighbor's child? And I mean, you might be able to do it, and I mean, but then in majority of the cases, big no, right? That individual child's parents may have that authority, right? Or that family members may have that authority. Okay, until and unless you have a very cordial relation, you are not supposed to do that, right? Similarly, here the point I'm trying to say is that whenever we are talking about this different elements in the XML world, we are either defining the element or we are referring the element. So now here I am definitely not defining it, I am referring it. But then somebody must have defined it, right? So that somebody is nothing but W3 org, okay, W3C community, World Wide Web, the org who defines all these standard, you might have heard of, right? World Wide Web Consortium. There are different group of companies who come together and decide certain standards, right? Which are followed across the board, right? So they have defined this. They have given certain flavor to it. I just want to get that flavor in my file. But then when they might have defined these elements, they must have defined some namespace also for this element. Yes or no? What I'm trying to say is, whenever they might have defined this element, they must have also defined a namespace also for this element. So now whenever I'm referring a element, I must signify the namespace associated with the element, or else you can say the elements are required to be referred with their fully qualified names. Elements are required to be referred with their fully qualified names. Yes. Now, if I write only this schema element, this is actually incorrect. Okay. This is incorrect. Now, let me explain you what I'm talking. Let's say I go to the internet. Okay. I will write XML schema namespace. Okay. This is a tutorial and all. My browser settings have got changed. I don't like this being, I use some other ones, which is fine. Uh, okay, this is W3org and all. Just give me a minute. I'll stop sharing for a moment. I need to fix this. I might need to show you multiple examples, so I don't want to use this. All right, let me start presenting. Okay, can you see something ubiquitous web domain? I think ubiquitous means something which is available everywhere, right? We say God is ubiquitous. I may not be pronouncing it 100% correct, but yeah, it is something which is available everywhere, but that's fine. Can you see the XML schema working group is closed, having completed its work successfully? The specifications are now maintained by W3C XML core working group, right? And here they have given something XML schema 1.1. This all stuff you might not, if you want to go in detail, you can definitely go it. But then there is lot of stuff, right? Even I don't know so much about it. But then, as I was telling, that there is W3C community who created and maintains it, right? Now they are kind of an owner of it, right? They are kind of owner of it. Now when, so I will say W3C schema element definition, right? So I have not defined it, but somebody must have defined it. Okay, so I go here. Okay, what is it is saying? I will say introduction. So this is actually this all stuff you see here. There is something called as schema namespace, or maybe we'll start with XSD namespace, right? So they here they have given some theory and all. namespaces with special status. So here they have defined some namespaces. So what we will do is we will see one file xml schema.xsd. Okay, this all theory you can read, that's fine. We will see something like xml schema.xsd. This is the file actually where your schema element has been defined. Okay, this is a file which is created by World Wide Web, right? And this is the file where your actual schema element definition is there. Okay, here can you see schema element? Yes or no? Can you see schema element? The name of the element is not
Yes.
access colon schema. The name of the element is schema. What is access?
Prefix.
Prefix
name.
or alias. Now the now when let's say this was defined by one person with the name John, okay, or a group W3 people, right? Now when they defined it, they told or they also defined a namespace, and that namespace for this element or for any element for that matter is defined with the help of an attribute called as target namespace. It is always defined with the help of an attribute called as target namespace. So target namespace is an attribute which is, or it is a kind of a namespace that helps to define a namespace associated with the element so that these elements can be referred in the future. Now, what I'm trying to say is this community who defined the schema element, they told that the target namespace means the namespace for this element, schema element and all its child elements. Schema element and all its child elements, the target namespace is which one? This one.
HTTP.
Okay. Now let me do one thing. Let me close this. I will say samples XSD file. Some people may not follow it completely. That's fine. You will follow it gradually. So here some example is here, right? Somebody, this is a XML file. This is not a schema file, right? Here we have some schema file. Somebody is writing a schema file and we will go here. Here you see we have a complete schema file. We have a complete schema file. We'll bring it into the notepad we have been working on. All right. So now you tell me, do we have the schema as the root element? Yes. Now with the schema element, there is a prefix. Prefix is like a shortcut. Prefix is like a shortcut. Why do we use a shortcut or a alias? To refer to some bigger entity which we do not want to write again and again, right? That's why you will use alias, right? Those people who have worked on SQL, right? So there we use alias very frequently, right? When we use joins and all. So we give some alias name to the table because there what happens is we might be writing a joins which is trying to join two or more tables, and those two tables may have same column names, right? So what we do is whenever we refer any column, we refer table name dot column name. But instead of writing the table name again and again, we give some alias name to the table name so that it becomes really easy and we don't need to write table name multiple times. Similarly, over here, what I'm trying to say is this schema element, which is developed by W3 people, this schema element, which is developed by W3 people, has a target namespace. So target namespace is a convention of an XML document which allows its elements to be referred in the future. I will repeat, I will write it over here so that you can put it in the words later on. Target namespace is the convention of an XML document which allows its elements to be referred in the future. Okay, and I will just actually typically we do not use the term XML doc. We'll say a schema doc. It is a convention of a schema document. You can call it as XML document also, which allows its elements to be referred in the future, right? A XML element can have at most one target namespace. Okay, we cannot have more than one target namespace. Typically, all the child elements of the parent element will also have the same target namespace. So we do not go and define the target namespace for each and every element individually. We define it for the parent element, or typically it is like one per file, and it becomes applicable for all the elements which are defined in that file. Okay. So now if you see, there is a schema file, right? There is a schema file. Do you see multiple target namespaces defined? There is only one target namespace defined, right? But then there are so many elements. This is a very big file. Yes or no? This is a very big file. So all the child elements also belong to this namespace also itself. And whenever we want to refer the schema element in any of our files, what will be the fully qualified name? What will be the fully qualified name? Can we refer directly? Can we write directly schema? Can we write directly schema?
No.
No, because schema is not the fully qualified name. How can we get to the fully qualified name? Using the target
Names.
namespace of this element. What is the target namespace of this element? This one, right? Ideally, when you are defining any element in any file, you should import this xml schema.xsd. Yes or no?
Yes.
Ideally, you should do that, right? Because until and unless it can find that xml schema.xsd, how would you be able to refer the element? You have started defining some xsd which starts with a schema element, but should it not know that where does the schema element come from? Ideally it should know, right? But then what happens is, this is one of the standard files which typically will be there in all your tools which you use in your xml parsers. So you explicitly do not need to mention any kind of import statements. That is internally taken care. But then whenever you are referring, it is very much similar to Java or any other language. So whenever you use Java, right, whenever you write a class and if you want to use any package, do you write an import statement? If you're using SQL, PL SQL, if you want to use something which is predefined, will you try to import that first or not? Right? So here, since it is a standard file, it is by default imported. But then when you're trying to refer any element, I told whenever you refer any element, you must specify the namespace associated with that element. I'm saying I want to refer schema element. Schema element is associated with which namespace? This namespace. Did I define this namespace? Who
No.
defined this namespace? If you just take this namespace and if you go over here, Control F, can you see this namespace is the same namespace which is defined by W3C community? You might get confused with this, forget about this. But can you see the target namespace value is exactly matching?
Yes.
Yes. So what I'm trying to say is, it is a namespace, it is the element which was defined by someone else. But now when I have to refer it, okay, when I have to refer the elements, I also need to do in such a manner that I give the fully qualified name of the element. And to get to the fully qualified name of the element, I need element name as well as the namespace name, right? Or namespace value. Are you understanding? Now whenever we are referring the elements, the namespace is referred. So you tell me one thing. Here, am I defining the namespace or I'm referring the namespace?
Referring.
How do I define it?
Target space equal to if you give, then it will.
If I am using target namespace attribute, then I am defining the namespace. But am I defining the namespace over here? No, right? I'm just referring the namespace. So the point I'm trying to say is the namespace is referred with the help of an attribute called as XMLNS. What does XMLNS stands for? It stands for XML namespace. Okay. We may have XMLNS attribute. We may have XMLNS attribute without prefix. We may have it without prefix, or we may have it with prefix. What is prefix? Prefix is an alias or shortcut, right? To refer the namespace. Now, what I'm trying to say is you will see a lot of files where it is written XMLNS equal to something, some blah blah thing. Now, a lot of people think, a lot of people assume, so you will typically see the values like this: http www.abc.com slash, let's say, calci. So what does a lot of people assume or believe is this file will go and try to get something from this URL. But that is absolutely wrong understanding. The value of the namespace, the value of the namespace is just any other string. Okay, it is not necessary that the value of the namespace has to be URL. The value of the namespace can be like this also. But across the industry, you would see people not writing it as like Sumit, Amit, or Infosys, TCS. Instead of that, they follow a convention, which is like a URL convention. And that sometimes confuses people. They start assuming that since it is some URL, it might go to this URL and try to load certain information, which is absolutely wrong. This concept of namespaces is absolutely a hypothetical concept. This URLs need not to exist anywhere. For example, I write www.cincinnati bablaboo, something like this. It is not at all necessary that some kind of application must be accessible using this URL and then only it will work. It is any other string. That's all. But why industry follows a convention of using a URL? Because the tendency of the URL to be redundant is less, and with the URL we can keep on appending some more information so that this namespace is always unique. So typically in the organizations, how they will define the namespace, they might define the namespace as, let's say, www.infosys.com, or I will use TGH. Okay, somebody might again put a copyright issue on my video. www.tgh.com. Then let's say maybe I am doing it for some business unit, or maybe let's say maybe some vertical. Let's say my vertical is retail. Okay, then within retail, maybe I have different business units. Okay, some XYZ. Then within that, I may have different accounts. Let's say I have an account with the name ABC. Within that an account, I may have a project, let's say DEF. Within that project, there might be different teams, let's say GHI. Then within GHI, there might be different business functions which we are developing. So that way you can keep on adding certain information so that you do it in such a way that this URL is unique and you do not end up creating redundant namespaces. Because if this namespace goes redundant, then the whole idea of having the namespace, or the whole purpose of having namespace, gets defeated. Because why we are using this concept of namespace? Just to make sure that my element at any given time can be referred individually, uniquely, without any kind of ambiguity. But at the same time, you have to understand this namespace, whatever you are doing here, you are not defining the namespace over here. Who will define the namespace? The owner of the element. At the time of defining the element itself, the namespace is also defined, and the attribute which helps in defining the namespace is target namespace. But then when you are referring those elements, there is an attribute which helps you to refer the namespace, and that attribute is XMLNS. Now, sometimes you might see XMLNS, sometimes you might see XMLNS NS1, or XMLNS XS, or XMLNS A. So this A or XS or NS1, whatever you see, is a prefix, and there is no hard and fast rule to choose the name of the prefix. It is your choice. Whatever name of the prefix you want to choose, you can choose. You do not have the authority to choose this namespace, but you always have the authority that you can choose a shortcut or the name of the prefix, and that same prefix is appended with all the elements which are associated with the same namespace. And the whole idea of doing so is that you would not want to write that complete namespace multiple times. Instead, you would want to use that shortcut so that your life becomes little easy. So what point I'm trying to convey is, if you see this file, this http blah blah blah, this is not something which is defined by me, right? I'm just referring it. And what is a shortcut? Access. So can you see all the elements here are prefixed with which names, with which alias? Access. So what does that mean? All these elements which are prefixed with an alias called as access, these all belongs to which namespace? These all belongs to this namespace. So this element, this complex type, this sequence, these all are not defined by me. W3C community has defined it, right? But an element with the name ship order is my creation. So what I'm trying to say is, when you write int a, are you owner of int or a? Let's say a, right? You did not define the nature of int. Int is something of predefined data type, right? But you defined a variable which is of integer data type. So you can consider yourself as the owner of a, but you cannot consider yourself as the owner of int. Similarly, here in this file, this elements, the schemas, these are different data types or predefined elements. You are trying to use them. When you're trying to use them, you are telling that which namespace are these associated with. And in order to do that, you are using this namespace, which is defined by W3C community. Now, once you have defined the schema, so if you observe this properly, let me put it into a notepad plus plus so that it becomes a little more easy to understand. All right. So now guys, how many complex elements? One complex element. So there is an element with the name ship order. It is a complex type element. What does sequence indicate? Sequence indicates that whenever somebody is going to write XML against the schema, that person or that consumer needs to follow the same order of the elements. So first element under ship order will be what? Order person. Is it a simple type of element or a complex type of element? How do you know it is simple? Because it is going to hold the data directly, right? Do you remember I told simple is one which can hold the data directly. Complex is the one which holds further elements within itself. Yes or no? Order person is of string type. So can it hold the data directly? Yes. So if you see ship order, we have specifically signified complex type. But with simple elements, you may do it or you may not do it. That is fine. It is optional, but it is a simple type of element. What about ship 2? Ship 2 is a simple type or a complex type?
Complex.
Complex.
It is written also here, right? So ship 2 in itself has how many elements?
4 again.
4.
4 elements.
4.
Very nice. Now this name, is it a complex or a simple?
Simple.
Address,
Simple.
Simple.
city, country. Okay. Ship 2 is a complex. Now then there is another element, item. And in item, it is written some attribute max occurs as unbounded. What does this max occurs unbounded mean?
It may have multiple
Equal
occurrence of the
items.
element.
Which means that you are telling to the
Can
consumer,
repeat.
boss, that you can send me multiple item element also. Max occurs unbounded means it is like a variable array that I will accept the collection of items. I will accept the collection of items max. So there is an attribute min occurs, max occurs. So by default with any element. So for example, this is the element, right? With this element also there are two attributes which are tied, but you are not seeing it because when you do not call them out separately, then the default value comes into the picture, and the default value is probably min occurs is 1, max occurs is 1. This is the default value of these two attributes. But whenever you want to change the default values, you can always go and write like this. Here I'm saying max occurs is unbounded. Unbounded means there is no limit, and I'm trying to say that I can accept how many item elements? N number of item elements. If I write 10 over here, what does that mean?
Only 10 item, 10 items.
That we will
can
accept at most 10 items. Now this item, is it a complex type element or simple type of element?
Complex type.
Complex. Type.
Complex. How many types of simple type of element does it hold?
4.
4 types.
Four.
4 types. Very nice. This also I'll close. Now there is an attribute. There is an attribute. What is the name of attribute?
Order ID.
Order ID. Type is integer. Use is required. Required means we must signify it, right? And where is this attribute? This attribute belongs to which element? Which element? Order person, ship to, item. Which element does this order ID belong to?
Ship order.
Very nice. It belongs to ship order, because see, if you are just collapsing these elements, order person and all, you do not see it, right? It is defined with the element ship order. So this is the schema, and the schema is a place where we are defining the elements. So here I'm saying structure of ship to is such that it will have name, address, city, country and all. So now when I define these different elements, ideally as per the standard, should I associate them with some namespace? So this is my, let's say this is my file. Sumit is the owner of it, and I would want that these elements can be easily referred in the future, right? Should I associate some namespace along to these elements which I'm defining?
Yes.
Yes. Which attribute should I choose to define the namespace?
Target name.
Very nice. Target namespace. Where should I define target namespace? Let's say I will define target namespace. Okay. If you do not remember the exact spellings and all, that's fine. So tell me one thing, this target namespace value, can it be only some URL? This target namespace attribute, can I write Sumit? I mean, is it something which is wrong? Answer is it is not wrong. But as per the industry, what is the convention we follow? Some URL. But does that URL or do we need to have that URL existing on any of the server?
No.
No,
It is
that
just a string.
it is just a string. I will repeat myself. Here there is a file where some structure is defined. So we are defining the structure of which element? Ship order, right? In ship order, we have an attribute order ID, we have order person, we have ship to details, and we have item details, right? Yes or no? So when you place an order on Amazon, so you get some items delivered at your doorsteps. Yes or no? So there is some company who is delivering that, right? Who is shipping it. So that request might go to that company, right? Maybe Flipkart or this Amazon, they may have their own shipment team, or they might work with some third party. Yes, third party means they might give that contract to some external company, that boss, you have to deliver my orders, I will give you the details. So that company will say, okay, I can do it for you, you send me the details in this format, right? So they will define a service where they will say, if you want us to deliver or ship any order for you, you send us a request with the help of this service in this format, and Amazon needs to follow that format. Yes or no? Now, if I want to consume this, do I need to define some XML which is incompliant to this XSD? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes. So now this is a schema file, which is fine. if I have to define the XML which is in compliance to this XSD, how would it look like? Which is the root element that I should start with? I'll repeat what I'm saying is this is the definition, right? Now this definition is typically defined by service provider, but service consumer would want to consume this service, right? And for consuming the service, let's say I have to send a request in this format. So if I want to define that request, how would it look like? It would start with XML prologue.
Yeah. It also have some definition.
Let's say it will start like this. Now what should be the root element?
Names. Names. Schema.
Definition.
Definition.
No. You're not understanding what I'm saying. The schema was defined by someone, okay? Now I'm not writing the specifications. Okay, let's assume that in the visual file, this XSD is referred, okay? And I have to call this service. I have to call a service for which the schema is like this. So when I have to call the service, what I have to send? I have to send some request. And that request will be in which format? It will be in XML format. How will that XML look like?
It should follow the XSD.
Very nice. So what should be my first element?
Name.
Schema.
Access
Schema?
element,
Sorry,
access
first
element
order
name
per-
equal to
No. The first element is ship order. Why ship order?
first access element name equal to ship order.
So you will write like this. Why? Because here, when somebody defined this, they told that the first element should be ship order. Here they are telling the first element name should be ship order. So that's why what I'm doing, I'm defining the element as ship order. Now within ship order, what should be there?
order person ship to.
Very nice. First, it should be order person. Let's say Sumit. Is Sumit acceptable? Because they are telling that order person should be some string, right? What is the next element?
Ship to.
They are telling ship to. Ship to. Start, close. Every starting element must have a closing element. Yes or no?
Yes.
Now within ship to, what should we have?
Name,
Name,
Address city.
name, address.
name. Okay. Let's say the name is, I'm sending the gift to, let's say, Prithvi. Name. Then what is next? Address,
Address.
city and country. Yes or no?
Yes.
Address is, let's say, something like ABC Plaza. I don't know. Some arbitrary address, some dummy address we are writing. Address. What is the next thing? City.
City.
So this is how you create the request. In Boomi world, right? We can create the profiles, yes. When you create the profile, XML profiles, you will get two options, or in fact, three options. You can create the profiles using schema, and you can create the profiles using sample XML also, right? But eventually when you will see the profile, you will see some like the structure getting created or not. You will have first element, then next element, you will do the mappings, and finally when you will do the mappings, you will see your document like this or like this. You will see documents like this only, right? Yes or no?
Yes.
But that document will be in compliance to some kind of profile or not, some kind of schema or not. Yes. So here that schema definition is there. In Boomi, we define the schema with the help of a profile component, but generally the schema is defined with the help of XSD. So what is the next element? City, let's say Hyderabad. What is next? Country. India. What is next, guys? What should be the next thing?
Item.
Inside ship2, outside ship2.
Let's say outside.
Outside.
So next we should have is item. How many items can I have?
10.
I can have 10 items, but let's say I have only one item. Okay. I'm just sending one thing, one item. Start of the element, close of the element. Within item, what all we can have?
Title, note, quantity, price.
We can have title. Okay, first I'll quickly create the elements and then we'll fill it. Note. So with note, it is written min occurs as 0. What does that mean?
Optional.
Very nice. That this is a optional element. It may be there, it may not be there, right? So sometimes when you want to send some item, you might write a note, right? If you go to any courier services, so you might write that this is the item, and maybe you can write that this is a fragile, right? So maybe some additional care is required to be taken care of, or anything of that sort, right? You are let's say ordering a cake for someone, right? You might want to write a note that please write this particular message on the cake. So something of that sort. It is indicating that this is not a mandatory element. With other elements, do you see min occurs, max occurs? Why don't we see that? Because for all those elements, the default values are coming into play. But when you want to go and change the nature to something other than default, you will go and define those attributes. Here, did we define the attribute? Yes or no? Because the default values are 1. But now I don't want the default values to come into play, but I want to change the behavior. So I went and changed the value from the default value to 10. Similarly, here I change the default value from 1 to 0. So I may have it, I may not have it. Similarly, like this, you will see sometimes one more attribute, nillable. Okay, I don't remember what is the default value. I think the default value is false, probably. Nillable is equal to true or false. What does that mean? If you see nillable as false, so this takes precedence. So typically when nillable is false, you may have something like this. What does that mean? Or you may have like this also, that's fine. Nillable is equal to false. What does that mean? That you cannot have this element as a null element. Okay, there the value must be there. See, there are two things. One is element should be there. Whether element will be there or not, that is basically controlled by this attribute. And whether that element will have the value or it can be a null element or not, that is controlled by this attribute. Are you understanding? So let's say order ID. I cannot have order ID as null. So what I will say, nillable is equal to true or false? False, right? False, right? Yes or no? Now there is a phone number, there is an email ID. You are fine that, okay, you will want to accept orders even though the people do not have email ID, but you mandatorily need the phone number. So when you will define the phone element, will you make nillable as true or false in case you want that phone number to be a mandatory element? You will say, min occurs is 1 and nillable is false. And when you do not want that to be a mandatory element, so if it is not a mandatory element, you can set min occurs is 0. Sometimes we will say min occurs is 1. That must be there in your XML structure, but nillable is equal to true. That means you must send that element in the XML, but that can go as a null element or an empty element. So sometimes you might have seen, for example, I'm writing title. Sometimes you might have seen some elements like this, right? Sorry, like this. These are called as empty null elements, right? So sometimes to make sure that we are adhering to the structure, we might need to send these elements, because in the schema, the owner might have sent that nillable is equal to true, but min occurs is 1. Are you understanding? Nillable is equal to true, that it can be null, but min occurs is one that you must have this element. That's why we might want to sometimes send the elements like this, that we have to mandatorily send them in the request. All right, so we can have item, within item we have title. Title is, let's say, maybe I'm sending one, what can we send? What do you want, Prithvi? One beer bottle. Okay.
Any-
Good way to end the, there are two Prithvis in our session. Okay, maybe good way to end the weekend. Quantity, let's say one. Okay, price, let's say 120. I don't know what is the price. Okay, that's fine, doesn't matter. So this is how your XML would look like, right? Behind the scene, when different applications are talking to each other, this is the way the data is being exchanged. If the data format is XML, and if the data format is JSON, the same data will be represented in the JSON format, which we'll see. Now, do you think this is the complete XML, or there is something missing?
Order ID.
Okay, very nice. Order ID is missing. Good catch. So order ID should be defined something like this. Yes or no? What else? Everything else is fine, or do you see something is missing?
We need to add a target namespace.
Okay, so now you have to tell me, am I defining the am I defining the elements over here, or am I referring the elements over here?
Referring.
Yeah, you're defining the element.
The element definition was here.
We are referring the element.
We are just referring the elements. Yes, and when we are referring the elements, we should refer it using what type of name? I must signify the namespace associated with that element. Did I anywhere tell that this ship order is associated with which namespace? Did I
No.
specify that?
No.
No.
So that part is missing. It means I have not taken care of namespace, right? So this is not the fully qualified name of the element. So this way it will not work. If I write this, I might feel I have done my job, but this is not going to work. This XML will not get bind to this schema. So here, when we have to, I'll go back to the notes. So when you're referring the namespaces, okay, the namespace is referred with the help of which attribute?
XMLNS.
The XML.
XMLNS.
XMLNS. So what I'll do is I'll go here and I will write XMLNS. Now what will be the value of this XMLNS? Hmm?
Sumit.
Whatever was the target namespace over here, because all these elements which I'm defining over here, what is the target namespace for all those? Sumit. I'm writing XMLNS is equal to
Yes.
Sumit. Now this XMLNS, does it have any prefix right now?
No.
No. So when we refer the namespace using XMLNS attribute, right? When we refer the namespaces with the help of XMLNS attribute not having any prefix, then it is called as default namespace. What it is called as? Default namespace, and all the elements in the XML file which does not have any prefix are considered associated with the default namespace itself. These are associated with the default namespace itself. So the point I'm trying to convey over here is, if I go back to that file, so this XMLNS Sumit, this namespace, is it only applicable for ship order, or is it also applicable for order person, ship to, name, item, title, quantity, price and all that stuff.
All the elements.
It is applicable to all the elements. So one approach is I define a default namespace. One approach is I define a default namespace. How do I define a default namespace? Or maybe I can say I'm referring a namespace such that I'm making this name as a namespace as a default namespace. So when I do not write any prefix, this is considered to be a default namespace, and all the child elements which are not prefix are also by default associated with this default namespace, which is fine. So when you're dealing with very simple scenarios, when you're dealing with simple scenarios where you're referring elements from a single file, then this is a possibility. You can always do that, right? But when you are referring the elements from different files, let's say 10 files, how many namespace you might need to refer over here? Right now, we are referring all the elements from the single file or not? And the single file has only one namespace. So that's why we could live with the default namespace. But just think of a scenario where we have 10 different schema files and I have to create a single XML file, okay, which is referring the elements from all those 10 different files. So how many namespaces will I have over here in my XML file?
10 namespaces.
Very nice. 10 namespaces, right? So when we have 10, can I use the concept of default namespace?
No, you
No.
need to use prefix.
Alias.
We have to use alias. You may use default, but then with a default, how many namespace only you can take care of? Only one, right? So whenever we have more namespaces, we do not encourage the use of default namespaces. The use of default namespace is only encouraged when we have one namespace to deal with. When you have more namespaces, we always prefer or recommend to use the concept of prefixes, and whichever element belongs to whichever namespace, please prefix the corresponding alias. Okay, now what we'll do is, okay, I know some of you might not be following me completely. That's fine. I'll make sure you follow. So now what we'll do is we'll go to the internet. Here we will say create XML from XML schema. So there are a lot of online tools which will help you. What it is saying? Online XML to XSD. XSD to XML converter is there. XSD to XML converter are very, very less actually. Okay, that's fine. We can go here and we can write here XSD. Yes, XML schema. We come down and here I'm saying I'm not a robot. Okay, and what is the root element? Ship order. Yes, and I'm saying generate XML. Okay, now it generated XML. Can you see it can have multiple items? Why it can have multiple items?
Max occurs is unbounded.
Max occurs 10.
Max occurs is 10. Now let's say I go here to the schema. Where is my schema? Here. I say max occurs is 1. Yes, max occurs is 1, and I say generate XML. How many items?
Only one.
Only one. Yes. So then it means this tool is smart enough to parse this XSD and generate the XML correspondingly. Do you see some XML prologue? Yes. You see ship order element. With ship order element, can you see this XML in a Sumit? Yes or no? Now let's say I go here, I change this Sumit to, let's say, Priyanka. Okay, it's saying the selected root element ship order does not exist. What does it happen? Okay. Let's refresh. Actually, what is happening is it is trying to match both. That is creating a problem, which is fine. We will once again start from scratch. I'm not a robot, which is fine. Generate an XML.
Change.
Okay. Can you see here? It gets changed. So it means, is there some link between these two or not? This target namespace. Is it making sense, guys? Now there is some exercise schema location, which means it is trying to refer some XSD, right? So this is implicitly taken care. This is pretty much required, right? Because you kind of internally want to adhere to some schema, right? So it is telling that which schema we are referring to. Can you see some order ID attribute? Yes. And then this is some standard namespace. XMLNS is the namespace and XSI is the prefix. Yes or no? So whenever we are referring we are creating XML out of XML schema. So that is also called as XML schema instance. So this is a standard namespace and this is a prefix. And where are we using this prefix? Here we are using this prefix. So this prefix is used with the attribute schema location and this schema. So you don't need to bother about that. This typically will be internally taken care. So what all it is trying to do is it is trying to refer you that it is trying to signify that this XML is in compliance to a particular XSD, right? And this schema location is a standard attribute. And what is the namespace associated with this schema location attribute? This one. That's why it is prefixed with XSI. So now you understand this one. XMLNS is Priyanka. So these all elements are associated with which namespace?
Priyanka.
Priyanka. Very nice. Now, any questions so far? One question is, can we have a XSD file without a target namespace? Answer is yes, we can have it, but actually that's not the right way, or that's not a standardized way. That's not a standardized way. So for example, I just refresh. I mean, you can try all these things out. I just want to pass on a thought process to you, right? What it is saying, the schema. I don't know why it is saying so. Okay, that's fine. Maybe it is. Okay, it is actually not allowing you to do that because this is an online tool. It is following certain standards, but typically you can have target without target namespace also. So if you go to that W3C schema example, did they define target namespace? No, right? They did not define it. So it's not a mandatory thing, but ideally you should always do it. Why we should do it? Because it is a convention of a schema document that allows its elements to be referred in the future. Why would I define a schema? Because I would want that these elements are referred in the future, right? So that's why we typically always define target namespace, but it's not mandatory that the value should be a URL. If it is URL, fantastic. But if it is not, then it's fine. Okay. Did we do something wrong? I don't know why it is. What is saying the selected root element, selected order does not exist. Okay, no worries. Okay, XML from XML schema online. Okay, it's not allowing. That's fine. So now if I use a different namespace, you see this is getting reflected, right? So this is just a methodology to give a unique name, nothing more than that. Any questions? Are you at least following something? Why? What is the significance of target namespace? Why do we have this XMLNS? Any questions so far? Whether it's complete silence, I don't know. The silence is for good or bad. Guys, speak up something. Yeah, I've been talking for almost last 100 minutes. You have to speak something. Are you following it?
Yes.
Yes, Sumit. Yes, Anand.
Okay, let's continue. So now we talked about target namespace. We talked about default namespace, prefix the namespace. Can we have more than one default namespace assigned to an element? we can have at most one default namespace, right? For a specific element, you cannot have more than one default, not only for element, for anything, right? Can we have default as more than one? No, right? You can have 0 defaults or at most one. Can we have more than one prefix namespace? We can have more than one prefix namespaces, that we can have. Now, another very, very important note which you have to understand is, this is very, very important. Whenever you're working with the schema, WSDL, and all this stuff, one thing you have to understand is, whenever we are referring an element, we must specify the namespace associated with it. I wrote this note earlier also, but then I want to add something to that note, and that something is that whenever we are referring an element, we must specify the namespace associated with it, regardless of the fact whether the element was defined in the same file or a different file. The element was defined in the same file or a different file. So sometimes what happens is, right now we are talking about very simplest of the use cases. Sometimes what happens is, let's say we have XSD file, right? In XSD file, we define some elements, and then we refer those elements within the XSD file itself. Okay, so in that case, what we might not need is import statement might not be needed. Yes or no? Import statements might not be needed. Why would we not need an import statement? Because both the things are part of the same file. But one thing which is pretty much needed is what? That whenever we refer that element, we must specify the namespace associated with that element. Okay, I'll give you some examples of this. This is very, very important to understand. We'll say simple calculator WSDL. I don't know what they did this with this DN. Okay, is it working? I don't know. Oh, okay, this is the one which we used the other day. Let's use that. Yes. Now this is a visual file. Now, if you understand this file, then I think you understand the concept of namespaces really well. We'll go back to this file again. All right. So here we have definitions as the root element. Yes or no? Definitions as the root element. Have we defined the definitions element? Are we the owner of definitions element?
No, we
No.
are referring the element.
We are referring the element. Now with the definition element, whatever is this written visual, what is this?
Prefix.
Very nice. It is a prefix. Is it mandatory that the name of the prefix has to be visual only?
No.
No, it can
No.
any.
It's not mandatory. Okay, so do not assume that if we are using a visual file, that the name of the prefix has to be visual. Okay, it can be anything. It can be WS, it can be XS, it can be XSD also. But generally, we use the name of the prefix, which makes more sense, right? Which is more sensible. So you should give it a little meaningful name. Okay. Now, do you see there is some standard namespace? https schemas.xml soap.org /visual, right? Did we create it? No. We are just referring it. So this is another standard namespace. This is another standard namespace. Now that's fine. So any element which is the child of element of definitions element, that element will be also associated with which namespace?
Same namespace as a parent.
So what all those child elements should be prefixed with?
Wisdom.
Visdal. Very nice. Now I change this Visdal to, let's say, WS. Is it correct? Can I first of all do that? Can I change from this from Visdal
Yeah,
to
You can change and
yeah,
you need to
but you
change
need to-
here also.
all for all child
If-
elements.
so here also I need to change, right? Can I completely remove this? If I remove this, what kind of
Standard.
namespace does it become?
Standard.
Default namespace.
It becomes a default namespace. Then what would happen is any element which will not have a prefix, that automatically will get associated with this namespace, right? So in that case, so first of all, I can do that. But I told you whenever we have multiple namespaces, we should avoid that. Yes or no? I told you we should avoid that. And if you want, you can do it. That's fine. But then what you have to take care of is that all those elements are also not having a prefix. Which all elements are not having a prefix? The elements which are child elements of definitions element. Yes or no? So this is how you have to see. Okay, maybe this way you will be able to see all namespaces properly because it was written in a single line. So with definitions element, there are so many namespaces defined, right? Or we are referring so many namespaces over here, isn't it? So many namespaces we are referring. So in that case, I told you we do not recommend to use which kind of namespaces. We do not recommend to use default namespaces. I actually, if you see this is a child element, let's assume this is not a mandatory element. Let's remove it. So for this definitions, if you will see the corresponding namespace must be defined over here. Do you see it is defined or it is referred over here? Yes, it is referred over here. Now, if you do not want to use visual prefix, you can play around with this. That's fine. At the same time, if I am the owner of the file, which type of namespace I can define so that these elements can be referred in the future?
Elements having target
Target
namespace.
namespace.
So can you see this file has one target namespace? Yes or no? This file has one target namespace. Do I have the control over this target namespace? Can I change the name of this target namespace?
Yes.
Can I change the name of this one? This one?
No.
No, because this is a standard one. I'm
Standard.
using it, but since this is my namespace, I can always play around with this. Yes or no? Let's say I want to change it to Boomi. I can always do that. That's fine. But is it recommended to name it like some visual, some string, or we should go with a URL based approach?
URL based approach.
But there is, we should recommend, or it is recommended to use the URL based approach, but there is no such hard and fast rule. All right. Now you see there is a types element. So types element is a child element of definitions element. Yes, it is also having same namespace, but this types element internally is referring one element, schema element, and schema element is associated with which namespace?
Target names.
No. Schema element has its own standard namespace. Just sometime we learned, right? Yes or no? This one. And what is the prefix for this? S. So that's why we are using S. So it is always not necessary. A parent element and its child elements will always have the same namespace. Do you see this example? Parent element namespaces. Which one? This one. Whereas child element namespace is this one. Yes or no? Yes. So now we have element form default, this target namespace, and this target namespace is for this element and it's all child elements. Are you understanding? This target namespace is for this element and its corresponding child elements. But one thing, if you might have observed, one thing you might have observed when this was not Boomi. Can you see the target namespace of the Visual file and the target namespace of XSD or the schema is same? Isn't it?
Yes.
So it can be same as well. If you are not willing to have it same, that is also fine. Okay. Now, if you scroll, so now do you understand what is this S prefix indicating? SSS. So in this case, how many complex elements? 1, 2, 3, 4. And what is the target namespace of this? Let's say this is Boomi. Okay. Let's play around with this. Let's say this is Boomi and let's say this is MuleSoft. Okay. Let's say this is MuleSoft. Is it a possibility? Answer is yes. Definitely it's a possibility that we may have two different target namespace. This target namespace is for what?
It's
This is for Visual.
definition. Yeah.
This is for definition and its child elements. And this target namespace is for schema and its child elements. Okay. All right. Let's move on. Now message element, does it belong to schema or does it belong to Visual? Or Visual, right? Definitions. Absolutely correct. So this message element is not a child element of a schema element, but it is a child element of definitions element. And that's why you see the prefixes Visual. So now you tell me here, am I referring a message element or I am defining a message element? This section, in this section, are we defining the message element or are we referring the message element?
We are defining.
We are defining. Here I'm defining one message element with the name add soap in, and this add soap in over here is this is the definition of the message element dependent on any of the schema elements? I'll repeat my question. Is the definition of the message element dependent on the any of the schema element? Arey Baba, it is dependent na. Add why you guys go almost all blank, right? This is the 7 or 8 hour we are spending. Is it not dependent on an add element which is coming from a schema file?
Yes, it is.
It is, right? Now this add element, if I have to refer, can I refer it directly or I have to associate it with, I have to refer it with a fully qualified name? This add element is defined over here. I'm trying to refer it here in the message section. Can I refer it directly or I have to give the fully qualified name? I have to give the fully qualified name, right? Now, what is the fully qualified name of this? Add, and then it should be like, it should be associated with which namespace?
MuleSoft.
MuleSoft. Have I defined anywhere MuleSoft on the top namespaces? No, right? So this is the method to define the namespace. But when we are referring, which attribute do we use? Which attribute do we use when we are referring the namespaces?
XML.
Target.
We use
Target
XMLNS. Target namespace is used when we are defining the elements. When we are referring the elements, we use XMLNS. So let's say I use XMLNS NS1 is equal to
MuleSoft.
MuleSoft. So anytime if I have to say that any element is associated with this namespace, what should be the prefix?
NS1.
NS1. So here I will say instead of TNS, NS1. Why NS1? Because I'm saying add element, and add element is associated with MuleSoft namespace, but that is target namespace. And when I have to refer the elements, I have to go and signify somewhere using XMLNS attribute, and this is the prefix. And that's why when I'm referring this element, I'm writing NS1, which means this is an add element which is associated with which namespace? MuleSoft namespace. Similarly here, what? NS1. Why I need to change it to NS1? Because earlier the default definition was such that the target namespace of the XSD and the visual were same, and which was this one, right? And for this namespace, what is the shortcut? TNS, right? But I came up with a new namespace. So that's why instead of changing anything existing, I'm creating a new namespace. If let's say instead of NS1, I want to continue using over here TNS, what should I do?
Target namespace.
We have to
equal
change the
to
target namespace.
HTTP.
Okay, I don't want to change the target namespace. Then what should I do? And in that case, what I have to do is I have to take this MuleSoft over here and I will change this itself. Will it work now? At least until this line, will it work?
Yes.
It will work, right? Because I'm saying, let's say instead of NS1, I'm saying TNS, and TNS is associated with which namespace? MuleSoft. And that add element target namespace is also MuleSoft. Everything matching, it will work. Okay. Here also, likewise, I can make TNS. Okay. So now, okay, this section is fine. All okay. Now let's say we will go to the port type. In port type, we have operation. Operation is a child element of a schema element or a WSDL element.
WSDL
Definitions.
Hmm?
WSDL definition.
WSDL element. And that's why what is the prefix? WSDL.
WSDL.
The name of the element is not WSDL colon operation. Okay. The name of the element is operation. And WSDL is a prefix which signifies that this operation element is associated with the namespace having a prefix as WSDL, and that happens to be http://schemas.xml soap.org/WSDL/. That's over. That's all right. Now in this operation, is it the, are we kind of defining the operation or we are referring the operation here?
Referring the operation.
Referring the
Referring the
operation. Name
operation.
equal to address. We are referring.
We are defining the operation. Here I'm saying there is an operation with the name add, and that operation has input and output. I'm not referring the operation. Refer means you already defined it and then you are trying to refer it. If I'm referring over here, then where is the definition? So when I say definition, don't think about the functionality. I'm talking only from the element perspective. Here, if you see here, I'm trying to create an operation with the name addition, right? If you will see in the binding section, I might be trying to refer it, or in other sections, I might be trying to refer it. Here, I'm trying to create it. And see here, I'm trying to create the definition. That's why only I tell now this operation is of which type? Synchronous or asynchronous? Synchronous, right? So now you tell me, remove this documentation, okay? And just let's focus on these two lines right now. These two lines. Is it synchronous or asynchronous?
Synchronous.
Synchronous.
Why synchronous?
Yes, both.
To
Input and
input
output.
and output.
Okay. And in the input, we are referring some message. Yes. So this message here, are we referring it, or right now in this line, are we referring it or we are creating it?
We are referring it
Referring it.
Where was it created?
in message.
In message.
In same file or a different file?
Same
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 file.
file.
Even though it was created in the same file, but still we have to give the fully qualified name, right? Now you
Yes.
tell me, if I have to refer this message type, which namespace is this add soap in associated with?
TNS.
No, TNS is first of all not a namespace. This add soap in element, this message name, which namespace is it associated with? Is it associated with? So WSDL is not a namespace, guys. Answer it properly.
Boomi.
Sorry.
Boomi.
No, http:// schemas XML.
It is not associated with the WSDL's name. It is associated with the complete WSDL namespace. Because you tell me one thing, this add soap in, you are creating it or is it a standard element? You are creating it, right? And anything which you are creating in this file will be referred with which namespace? this target namespace,
Boomi.
and this add soap in is associated with this Boomi namespace.
Boomi.
That's what we did, right? Even for this add, just think about it once. Some elements we use, right? Add. You guys told me that add is associated with which namespace? MuleSoft namespace, right?
MuleSoft.
Similarly, this add soap in, which is a message that is defined in a WSDL file. So this is associated with the namespace of the WSDL, right? Which in this case happens to be Boomi. Now, if I have to, so this is fine. Now, if I have to refer this element, for referring which namespace attribute do we use? We use XMLNS. I will define XMLNS. Let's say NS2
Is equal to Boomi.
is equal to Boomi. So now if I want to refer any element which is associated with Boomi namespace, which prefix should I use?
NS2.
NS2.
NS2. So when I'll go here in my operations here, instead of TNS, what should I use?
NS2.
NS2.
If I will use TNS, then what it will try to do?
Associate.
It will try to associate it with the MuleSoft namespace.
MuleSoft.
But do we have that? Are these actually associated with MuleSoft namespace? No, right? It is associated with
NS2.
Boomi
Boomi.
namespace, and that Boomi prefix is NS2.
NS2.
This is the whole funda. If you understand this, you are good to decode any visual file or XSD file. I mean, when you're working on Boomi, typically you might not need this type of knowledge, but yeah, if you're working on integration for long term, definitely this knowledge will be helpful. Even in Boomi, it will be helpful, I would not say. So let's say sometimes if you're working with some legacy applications where they will have really complex visuals, so Boomi profile component has some limitations. Sometimes it does not add sometimes certain namespaces. It sometimes does not add certain attributes. Then if you know all these things, then you can always tweak that around. Always see the visual, try to decode that in your mind, try to come up with a structure that you think should be the one for the calling that operation, and then you compare with the one which your Boomi tool or SOAP UI is creating. That way you will have a really good understanding. Okay, let's take one small example. Okay, we'll say currency conversion WSDL. Okay, so now first of all, few questions over here. In this WSDL file, right? We saw this WSDL earlier also, if you guys remember. Is it an inline schema or an external schema? I can scroll down. Inline schema or external schema?
External schema.
External. But don't you see the definition here? Do you see any import statement?
No.
So it is an inline schema.
Internal inline schema.
Inline.
It's inline schema.
It's inline schema. Very nice. Now you tell me this list currencies element, which namespace is it associated with? Take your time, think about it.
HTTP name, right? The target namespace they have given.
And what is that?
HTTP
HTTP
// www.xignite.com services.
Very nice. This element is associated with this namespace. Yes. All right. So now what we'll do is we'll take this visual file, jump to the SOAP UI. We'll create a SOAP project. So now this element name is list currencies. So we'll copy this. We'll try to find this list currencies where it is being used. This list currencies is being used in one message. Yes or no? Yes or no? And here
Yes.
their so when they have defined this TNS prefix would be associated with which namespace? The same namespace which you guys mentioned
Yes,
some time back,
element.
right?
Yeah.
Yes. And we will see where this message is used, in which operation. Yes. So this is used in which operation? List
List
currencies operation.
currencies.
So we'll go here, we'll see for list currencies. Do we see list currency over here? We'll go to the request. Can you see the request? Okay. Now when you see the request with list currencies, what is the prefix?
SUR.
SER. SER. And SER definition is
Service.
HTTP
HTTP.
Ignite.com services.
is it matching? Is your understanding correct? It's correct,
Yes.
right? That's what you guys also told,
Yes.
right? Now, why? What is the SOAP? What is the name of the element? SOAP : envelope or only envelope?
Envelope.
Envelope.
Envelope is the name of the element. What is the prefix? SOAP.
So
And this SOAP, is it a standard one or is it something which we created?
standard one.
It's a standard one. So header is the child of envelope. That's why it has the same prefix.
So prefix.
Body is the child of envelope. That's why it has the same prefix.
So prefix.
But this list currencies, is it a child of SOAP envelope?
No.
No, right? It is belonging to a different namespace. That's why we use a different namespace over here. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes, we will take one more. So this all, I think this is pretty easy. Once you understand, this is pretty easy. There's nothing much tough about it. Anyone who doesn't understand, please go through the video. I mean, if you'll say repeat once, I don't know where to repeat from because I've been talking. So you might need to refer this video one more time. If you have some issues, I will recommend you, if it is possible, you guys get some kind of tool. There is something like XML Spy, or even if you can get JDeveloper installed in your machines. If you want to learn more about this, it will be helpful. Otherwise, whatever I've explained is more than sufficient to work on this, schemas or visuals. You may not need to know more than this.
Okay, sir.
So what we'll do is we'll take a pause over here. I think we have passed so much of information. So this is about, SOAP. And now what we'll do is we'll see how to consume a SOAP in Boomi, which is pretty simple. How to expose a SOAP in Boomi, right? We'll see these two things and then we will jump on to the rest. Okay. All right, then let's take a break over here and we'll continue next week, guys. Next Saturday, same time, 7:30 p.m.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
All right.
Okay, Sumit.
Thank you.